Hello everyone, welcome back. So in today's video, we're going to go through what a circumference is. Now, in the previous lesson, I have explained to you that a circumference of a circle is basically the outer edge of a circle, right? So in this lesson, I'm going to explain to you how to calculate the length of a circumference. So let's get started. The perimeter of a circle is the distance around its boundary. The perimeter of a circle is called the circumference. So to work out the circumference, you have to remember this formula. And there are two formulas. So the circumference, C for circumference, is equal to pi. Now pi is basically this special number that we use to work out the circumference of a circle. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute how to get this value. Circumference equals to pi times the diameter. Now if you still remember from the previous lesson, the diameter is basically the length of a line that goes through the center, right? The other formula is circumference is equal to 2 times pi times the radius. And if you still recall, radius is basically the length that goes from the center of the circle to the circumference of the circle. And the reason these two formulas are the same is because we know that the diameter is equal to 2 times the radius. Right, so in this case, the diameter is just the same as 2 times the radius. So essentially, these two formulas are the same. Okay. And yeah, the diameter is 2 times the radius. So now I'm going to show you how to work out the circumference using your calculator. So say if the question says, determine the circumference of each circle to the level of accuracy stated, the exact value. Okay, so to do part A, when it says exact value, that means they don't want you to use your calculator. They just want you to leave your answer in terms of pi, okay? So you just use the formula, circumference equals to, now which formula do we use here? Do we use the formula with the diameter or the formula with the radius? So for this question, because they give you the diameter is 6 centimeters, then we use the formula with the diameter. Circumference equals to pi times the diameter. In this case, diameter is 6. And how do you simplify pi times 6? Well, that's just equal to 6 pi. Right? Make sure you write the units. So the units is centimeters. So then your answer is 6 pi centimeters. And that's how you find the circumference, which is the... If I copy this question down. So what you just found here, what this 6 pi represents is this length. Okay. Okay, my drawing is not perfect, but you get the idea. Now let's do a different question. It says, find the circumference correct to 2 decimal places. Okay, so let's have a look at question B. So what we want to find here is, so we want to find out what this length is, right? Now how do we do it? Well, we can just use the formula. Formula says, now which formula do we use? Do we use the formula with the diameter or the radius? Well, they give you the radius here, right? So then we just use the one with the radius. So circumference equals to 2 times pi times r. And that's equal to 2 times pi times, now the radius. What's the radius? Radius is 4.5, right? Okay, so now when you get to this step, because it wants you to give your answer in 2 decimal places, this means you need to use your calculator. So now I'm going to take out the calculator and I'm going to show you how to type it in. So 2, so I assume you don't need help typing the 2 in. Now to type the pi in, you need to press shift and then this button over here. As you can see, the top left here is a pi symbol, so that's how you get the pi. So just do it again. You have to press shift and then this button to get the pi. And then you got to times it by 4.5. Right. So this is your answer. So that's actually how long this whole length is. Now it says 2 decimal places, so you just write 2 decimal places. So that'll be 28.27, right? And make sure you write the units, which is centimeters. And there you go. That's done. So we actually we were able to work out how long this perimeter is by using the formula to work out the circumference. Okay, so hopefully that's quite clear. I'm just going to go through one more question. So let's see question 1F. Now, if you read the question, it says, calculate the circumference of each circle, giving both the exact answer and the answer correct to 2 decimal places. So they want you to give an answer that has pi inside, and they also want you to give an answer that's correct to 2 decimal places. Alright, so let's just get started. Now, remember it says calculate the circumference. So then which formula do we need to use? Do we use the formula with the radius or the diameter? Well, the diameter is given to us, so then we just write the formula with the diameter. Circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. In this case, is equal to pi times what? The diameter is 10.6. So then if you want to give the exact answer, then the answer should be equal to 10.6 pi centimeters, right? So this is the exact answer. Now, if you want to give the answer to correct the 2 decimal places, then what that should be is you just have to type this into your calculator. So 10.6 pi. So you can just type 10.6 pi. And this should give you 33.30. So make sure you understand what the question says by giving both the exact answer and answer correct to 2 decimal places. Okay, so this should cover you up until question 4. Now, I'm going to go through a different type of example, and these questions will be slightly more challenging. In this question, it asks you to calculate the length of each arc correct to 2 decimal places. So remember, an arc is going to be a part of a circumference, right? Now, because we know that this is an arc, so just to explain what an arc is again. Just going to copy this here. So if you still do remember from last time, so if you have a circle that looks like this, an arc is basically a part of a circumference. So you can say this line, because this line is a part of the circumference, so this is called an arc. So the question says calculate the length of an arc correct to 2 decimal places. So in other words, they want you to calculate this length here, right? So how do we do this? Well, what we can do is we can work out the length of the circumference of the whole circle, and then we multiply it by the proportion, right? So that's one way that we can do this, and that's what they did over here. So they first determined the fraction of the circumference, which is 50 degrees divided by 360 in degrees, and then what they do is they multiply the fraction by the length of the whole circumference, and that's how they get the length of the arc. I hope that's clear to you. So I'm going to go through a question. So we know that to determine the fraction of the circle, we have to do so we can just say proportion is equal to 50 degrees divided by 360 degrees, right? And what does this give you? This gives you 5/36. And to work out the length of this arc, we just have to multiply the proportion by the circumference. So then we can say length is equal to 5/36 multiplied by the circumference, so 2 pi r. Now the reason we use 2 pi r instead of pi times the diameter is because this 8 is the radius. This 8 is not the diameter. So then that's equal to 5/36 multiplied by 2 pi. Now the radius is 8, so times 8. And what you can do is just type all of this into your calculator. So you just do 5/36 times 2 pi, shift pi, times 8. And you get your answer, 6.98. Right, and that's what the answer that they have over there. And this should be in centimeters. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few more of these examples, as I do believe these are a little bit more challenging. So let's try and do this question. So what this question is asking is calculate the length of the arc. So it's not actually asking you to find the perimeter of this shape. It's only asking you to find out this length here. Now step 1, find the proportion. So proportion is what? Proportion is equal to 120 degrees divided by 360 degrees, which equals to 1 on 3, right? So that means we know that this arc is going to be 1/3 of the circumference. So then we can just say length is equal to 1 on 3 times by the circumference, which is 2 pi r. That's the formula. Which equals to 1 on 3 times 2 pi times the radius. Now what's the radius here? Radius is 7. Remember, this 7 is not the diameter. This 7 is the radius, because this is the center of the circle. Between the center to the circumference, it's 7. So what you can just do is type this into your calculator. So 1 on 3 times 2 pi times 7. This gives you 14.66. Okay, so hopefully that's quite clear. I'm not going to go through any more, but I think this should be sufficient. Now, the last part of the exercise is going to ask you to work out the perimeter of each figure. So that means they can give you a shape like this, and what you need to do is work out the sum of all the lengths. So you should be able to do this by now, because you know how to work out the length of the arc. Now, to work out the perimeter of this shape, you have to find the length of this arc, then you have to add the 5 here, and you have to add the 5 there, because as you know, the radius has to be constant throughout. Alright, so let's just try and do this question. Now, these are going to be the hardest type of questions, so make sure you pay attention. Alright, so let's just do question A first. So question A says calculate the perimeter to correct the one decimal place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the length of the arc first. Okay. So then to do the length of the arc, you just do the same step as here. So work out the proportion. And the proportion is equal to 40 degrees divided by 360 degrees, which equals to what? 1/9. So then the length of the arc is what? Is equal to 1/9 times by 2 pi r, which equals to 1/9 times 2 pi times by the radius. So the radius in this case is 5. And what does this equal to? Type it into your calculator. So you have 1/9 times 2 pi. Make sure you get used to typing the pi times 5. So you get 3 point. Now, because the question says one decimal place, so you just write 3.5. However, we're not done here, because the question asks you to find the perimeter. It does not ask you to just find the length of the arc. So to find the perimeter, you also need to find these two lengths, right? This one and this. So then you can just say perimeter, or P for perimeter, is equal to 3.5 plus the length of the blue sides, which is 5. And this is also going to be 5, right? Because remember, this is the radius. The radius is going to be the same. Plus 5. And this should give you 13.5 centimeters. Now let's take a look if that's correct. And can you see it's 13.5. Okay. So let's take a look at question B then. Question B is going to be a little bit more tricky, but it should be alright. So now to do this question, we're going to find the length of this part first. Okay. So this is also going to be an arc. So how do we find this? Now we know that this is a semicircle, right? So that means we know that the circumference is just going to be, the length of this part is just going to be half the length of the circumference, right? So because it's a semicircle, then we can say proportion is equal to what? Proportion is equal to a half, because it's half a circle. So then the length of the arc is going to be half times 2 pi r. Actually, tell you what, so I don't need to use 2 pi r here. So I can just use pi times the diameter, because we know what the diameter is, right? Because we know that this length is also equal to 2, right? If this length is 2, this length is also going to equal to 2. So that's going to be the diameter of the circle, so we can just use pi times d. So then that's equal to half times pi times the diameter, which is 2. And we can type this into our calculator. So you just type in half times pi times 2. And what do we get? 3.14. So because it's one decimal place, I'm just going to write it to one decimal place, which is 3.1. Now, how do we find the length? How do we find the perimeter of this shape? So we also need to account for this length, this length, this length, and this length, right? So what are they going to be? So we can just say perimeter is equal to this length plus, well, because we know these are all going to be 2 centimeters each because of the dash here, right? They all have this dash. This means they're all the same length. So we can just do 2 centimeters times by 3 because there's 3 of them, right? And what does this give you? This gives you 9.1 centimeters. Let's check the answers. 9.1 centimeters, right? So with these questions, you have to be a bit more patient, as some of these questions can take quite some time. So I'm just going to pick some of these questions and do it. And like I said, these questions are going to be a bit challenging. So just please take your time. Okay, so I'm going to do question, say, the I. Okay. Question I is going to be a bit challenging, but we'll see. So now to do this question, we have to actually work out 3 arcs. Okay. So what we can do is this. We can just find out one arc first and then times it by 3. Okay. So how do we find this? So we know that the proportion is what? Proportion. Now this is going to be half a circle, right? So we can just say proportion is equal to a half. So then to work out the length, we just do length is equal to half times pi times d, right? Because we know that the diameter is 5.7. We don't need to use the radius, which equals to half times pi times 5.7. Now, if you want, you can actually simplify this. So you can just simplify this as 5.7 times pi is just 5.7 pi, or over 2. So you can actually leave your length like this. Now the reason I'm saying that is because we have to multiply this number by 3 in order to get the length of all 3 sides, right? So then we can just say the perimeter of the whole shape is equal to this number times by 3 plus we have to add this length, right? And what's this length? This length is just 5.7. And then we can type this into a calculator. So what we have is 5.7 pi on 2 times 3 plus 5.7. And this gives you 32.6. Because there's one decimal place. So yeah, so this is actually quite a challenging question. So just take your time with these questions, as it does take a bit of practice. I'll go through another one just to be sure. So let's take a look at 6, the F. Alright, so how do we do this? So, like I said, first find the length of the arc. So proportion is what? Proportion is equal to 60 degrees divided by 360 degrees, which equals to 1 on 6. So then the length is equal to 1 on 6 multiplied by 2 pi r, right? Because we only know the radius here, which equals to 1 on 6 times 2 pi times 9.3. And what does this equal to? So you can do 1 on 6 times 2 pi times 9.3. This is 9.7. Alright, so now what else do we need to account for? We need to account for this length and this length, right? So then to work that out, we can say perimeter is equal to 9.7 plus 9.3 and 9.3. So 9.3 times 2. And this should give you, let's see, 28.3 centimeters. Alright, so I've covered some of these examples. So please do take your time when doing question 6, as these questions can get a little bit tricky. Alright, if you have any more questions, just feel free to send me a message. Thank you for listening.